Welcome back to Vertical Intelligence. This is Alice Ann Schmidt. So we started this series kind of like a toddler, asking lots of why questions about this corporate world and its leaders and how everybody is responding to this emergence of AI in our day-to-day lives. So for example, why are corporate executives laying off tens of thousands of people with just an email? Why has return on investment been so surprisingly low? What are we supposed to make of these reports that the token charges to use AI are sometimes more expensive than the humans who used to actually do the work? So the time has arrived, finally, 5 episodes in, to be able to answer these questions more directly. In a way, we have at last reached the level of mind that can begin to provide an answer in a more meaningful way. It is the level of mind that we usually ascribe the label wisdom to. So, to quickly orient ourselves, let's review what we've covered so we can clearly see where we are and where it is that we need to go next. So all humans are born completely narcissistic and impulsive. This is actually a good thing, as strange as that sounds. A baby really shouldn't be bothered with the problems of the world. But the first 4 to 5 years of our lives, we only have the neurobiological and psychological capacity to see our own needs and wants. A psychologist would call this level of mind the first-person perspective. Eventually, we learn a bit more self-awareness and self-control, and gradually the second-person perspective is born. We start to figure out that other people have experiences too, and sometimes it's different from our own. And we learn the rules of society. We learn how to fit in, how to share our toys. We say please and thank you. We apologize when we make a mistake. There are literally thousands of other cultural and social norms. In a corporate world, this second-person perspective is what drives the health of a company's policies, its norms, its culture, its just general sense of this is the way that things are done around here. Without this foundational layer, we can't really build anything else on top of it that will work very well. But these conventional rules and norms are not really enough to run a company in today's complex world, unless maybe you're just a mom and pop shop that is only serving your local community. As individuals, most of us began to transition into a more complex third-person perspective in our late teens or our early 20s. We gained the ability to use abstract logical reasoning skills. We stepped outside of the group norms that were handed to us by our families and our cultures, and we began to question these rules for ourselves, and that allowed us to think and create in new kinds of ways. So the third-person perspective is the world of the scientific method, of business frameworks and democratic societies, of 5-year strategic plans, of personal values that can be adopted with independent consideration. Then, historically, in the 1990s, there were large segments of society that began to shift into what we would call the fourth-person perspective. Philosophers coined this shift the rise of post-metaphysical thinking. It is the first perspective that can step outside of the first and second and third and begin to critique the very lens through which it is looking. So, for example, rather than following diet guidelines that are based on a meta-analysis of peer-reviewed nutritional research, that is a third-person perspective move, the fourth-person perspective person might say, I am trying out this new diet. It's based on all of the current science, but I also know that nutrition science changes all of the time and it tends to be heavily funded by food lobbies. So I am tracking all of my data, but I am also tuning into my own body's intuition, and I'm recognizing that what works for me might not work for someone else, and vice versa. So broadly, the fourth-person perspective says it depends on the context. It replaces the certainty that we developed in the third-person perspective with curiosity and a willingness and capacity to question its own assumptions. We start to recognize that we cannot logically analyze our way out of every human dilemma. So let's unpack this really rich landscape so we can better understand how to answer some of those questions about AI that I posed at the beginning. In the late 20th century, cognitive science irrefutably proved that we construct our beliefs with great fallibility. So in other words, it revealed the steep limitations of the rational scientific mind, the third-person perspective. To quote Dr. Tom Murray's paper titled Knowing and Unknowing Reality, quote, we cannot perceive or deduce beliefs about reality with anything approaching complete accuracy. So we talked about a few of these cognitive biases in the last episode, things like the Dunning-Kruger effect or the overconfidence effect or reification. There are literally hundreds more of these that have been discovered by cognitive science, and if this topic fascinates you, I recommend checking out the resources on the Center for Applied Rationality's website or on discussion forums and the articles that are posted on a website titled Less Wrong. I wish that a fundamental working knowledge of this sort of topic was something that was required by perhaps members of Congress or boards of executives. Alas, our society has not quite yet gotten there. That does not prevent you, dear listener, from becoming an inadvertent menace to yourself or to society because you fail to appreciate the limitations of your own abstract mind. So how do we do that? When we engage honestly with reasoning and abstract thinking with our third-person perspective, we will inevitably stumble upon its own shortcomings. We might think that we have found a perfect solution only to then create some unintended consequence. And history is littered with stories like this. In an attempt to save sugarcane crops from the larva of the French cane beetle, biologists introduced exactly 102 cane toads from Hawaii into Australia. Those cane toads did not eat the larva, and without any natural predator in this new environment, and with a capacity to be able to eat anything that it could fit into its mouth, the cane toad spread like wildfire, which then brought several native species of lizards and insects to near extinction, which of course just made the whole situation far worse than anyone could have anticipated. In the corporate sphere, there are endless case studies that are written about attempts to automate tasks in order to create better efficiency metrics that end up backfiring in ways that leave leadership absolutely scratching their heads. One of the more common side effects is that all of the easiest parts of the job are now gone, which leaves workers with only the most difficult and draining tasks, which means that everybody burns out and some of them eventually leave. Those that are less behind tend to be less productive than they were before. So these effects were first outlined in cognitive scientist Lisanne Bainbridge's 1983 paper titled The Ironies of Automation. In 2016, The Atlantic wrote an article titled The Automation Paradox with the tagline, "When computers start doing the work of people, the need for people often increases." It seems that maybe no one from Meta or OpenAI or Anthropic or Google has read any of these papers. Confronting the limitations of our own reasoning is not just frustrating or perplexing on a cognitive level, it is emotionally draining as well. The third-person perspective does have the ability to begin to notice the way that thoughts and emotions will influence one another with some training. But the fourth-person perspective is truly the first level of mind where we can begin to more fully appreciate the importance of our emotions and our intuition in our lives. After all, there is something incredibly seductive on an emotional level about the simplicity of our rational and abstract mind. It feels clean and neat. It tells us, if we just had more data, like we could really solve this problem, which makes us feel kind of powerful. So the third-person perspective can't really tolerate the messiness of paradox and ambiguity. Psychology and the wisdom traditions outside the modern Western world have created literally hundreds of these psychological technologies that are needed to guide us out of the doorway of the abstract third-person perspective mind and into the fourth-person perspective. But rather than point you toward any one specific practice, I want to do something more broad so as to be applicable to any of you who are listening. So you and I, and every human on this planet, experience something called epistemic drives. These are innate psychological motivations that compel us to seek out information, to organize that into knowledge, and to use that knowledge to make sense of what we perceive as reality. It is synonymous with curiosity. So these tendencies of our mind are fundamentally driven by our emotions. Just like our biological drive to eat or to have sex, a person can never outgrow or eliminate their epistemic drives, but we can become more attentive and responsive when they arise. So these epistemic drives serve many positive functions in our lives, but they also create biases and errors and sometimes even ethical problems. So I'm going to describe some of these drives to you, and I invite you to not just think about them as concepts, but I want you to pause and feel the nature of them in your own personal lived experience. This is a way to flex your fourth-person perspective muscles. Physicist David Bohm called this self-perception capacity proprioception of thought. So proprioception is your ability to feel your body as it's moving in space. It's what allows you to not tip up when you stand over, or it's what helps you move through a doorway rather than bumping into the wall that is next to it. He's pointing to the necessity to be able to feel the movements of our thought itself. And he said, quote, "We could say that practically all the problems of the human race are due to the fact that thought is not usually proprioceptive." So any specific epistemic drive exists in a give and take relationship with its opposite. So let's take two as an example. We have an epistemic drive for abstraction, and that exists in a relationship with concreteness. So our drive for abstraction is found when we create an analytics dashboard that shows our team's productivity. That exists in relationship with a similar drive for concreteness, or we could think of that as realness. We experience that when we are sitting across from our colleague in a meeting and we recognize they are physically exhausted because we know that they've been caring for a parent in hospice. Abstractions are critical and necessary in our large and modern workplaces, but analytic dashboards are not a full picture of reality. It is only when we fold in the lived truth of our exhausted colleague that we start to get closer to the truth of our team's productivity. Let's look at another example. Abstraction is found in a corporate-wide policy that mandates we need to come into the office exactly 3 days a week in order to optimize collaboration metrics and cultural synergy. Concreteness is found in a specific working mother who now endures 2 hours a day in gridlock traffic while her child is sitting in a daycare waiting room, all of which is destroying her somatic well-being. But maybe another member on the team is relieved to have all of their coworkers back in the office, and they're using this as an opportunity to get around a table and talk through the delays that they're having on a project. So as we said, abstraction is necessary in order to skillfully navigate the complexity of the modern work world. We do genuinely need our dashboards, our cross-functional reporting models, our HR policies, our strategic plans. However, the concrete reality on the ground cannot be ignored. So I invite you to actually feel into the physical and the emotional sensations of that tug of war. Your drive for abstraction likely feels clean, orderly, deeply satisfying. It gives us a sense of mastery and control. But our drive for concreteness is knowing that detailed, on-the-ground living experience matters too. We feel exhaustion when we're burned out. We feel the joy of camaraderie when we have an honest and open conversation with a colleague. We love the sense of accomplishment and joy when everyone pulls together to get a big project over a finish line. Those things matter as well. So the moment that we allow both of these realities in our awareness simultaneously, a profound sense of inner friction is likely to arise. Your mind is going to want to do a defensive maneuver. It will scramble for some kind of solution. And that is a textbook third-person perspective reflex. So at the third-person perspective, the mind experiences paradox and emotional dissonance as something like an intellectual error that needs to be solved for. It cannot really tolerate the discomfort of ambiguity, so it will use rational analysis to sanitize the situation, and it will choose an action that might erase anxiety in the moment, but it will almost always leave the deeper issue unresolved, which then tends to make the bigger problem worse. So the fourth person perspective move is to flex your proprioception of thought, to feel the physical and emotional conflict or ambiguity. So for a moment, just notice how deeply you crave the safety of the abstract when reality feels too unpredictable to hold. Of course, we do live in a material world, so a business cannot run on passive contemplation alone. Our budgets have to be signed, our products have to be launched. Real life does require us to come down on a side, so to say, and make a definitive decision. So, how does a fourth person perspective leader actually make a choice without falling back into the cold or clinical indifference of the third person perspective? They do it by changing their fundamental relationship with their own thoughts and with their own feelings. They recognize that business frameworks, metrics, restructuring plans, these are provisional tools. They are not absolute laws of nature that are going to guarantee a specific outcome. So when a fourth person perspective leader has to implement perhaps an aggressive efficiency policy, they're not going to look at a spreadsheet and then boast about optimized headcounts. They will stand in front of the room, they will look their team in their eyes, and they will hold the staggering weight of the trade-offs that have to be made, and they will be able to speak about them honestly. that capacity within a leader is felt by the people in the room, and it will deeply impact the nature of how that message is received and how people respond as a result. So the fourth person perspective leader can use abstraction when it's needed in the business context, but they also know how to hold it lightly. They know how to remain committed and to stay fully awake to the concrete human shrapnel that business decision might cause. It's as if they say to themselves, this is a necessary friction, it is radically incomplete, and I will remain present to repair the relational tissue that might break as a result. We have all heard that people don't quit companies, they quit managers. And this is why. In the paper that I mentioned earlier by Dr. Tom Murray called Knowing and Unknowing Reality, he presents a much larger list of these epistemic drives and their balancing drives. And so if you want a fuller explanation, please review that paper there. To give you just a couple of examples, there is the drive for simplicity, which exists in relationship with our drive for complexity. There is the drive for certainty, or maybe confirmation bias, which exists in relationship with our desire for novelty and surprise, with our openness to the unknown. These drives are not psychologically separate. They do tend to overlap quite a bit. So in the examples of abstraction that I gave you, you can also find flavors of other epistemic drives, for example, simplicity or unity or certainty and others. So over time, as you open further into your lived felt experience, perhaps you find that you are grasping too much for certainty or craving simplicity, or you're trying to coerce another person into agreement with you. As I hope you're beginning to appreciate, understanding these drives is not just a rational move. Of course, seeing them play out in our decision-making is really about making contact with our emotions and our visceral felt experiences. Most of our modern Western culture tends to err too far on one side of the drive table. So strengthening the balancing drives both in ourselves and in our workplaces is one path to dealing with this complexity crisis with more wisdom. So, for example, we might need to be in a better relationship with our desire for perfection by creating more tolerance for imperfection. Or maybe we need to stop grasping for a complete, comprehensive solution and be willing to accept the limitations or lean into the mystery of a situation. We need to not reduce a person or a situation into its simplicity, but to also appreciate and celebrate the complexity. So aside from viscerally inhabiting our epistemic drives so that we can wield them more skillfully, the fourth person perspective unlocks a critical capacity for corporate achievement and well-being, and that would be systems thinking and a collective orientation. So I stated earlier that at the third person perspective, with some training and practice, a person can begin to observe the nature of their own thoughts and emotions, and they can begin to notice the way that their emotions influence their thoughts and vice versa. But they remain entirely blind to the water that they are swimming in. What I mean by that is they cannot look within and spot the prejudices within them that are born of misinformation, or to recognize the way that their worldview might be constrained by their cultural upbringing. So in other words, in the fourth person perspective, the system itself, the we, the collective, that becomes something like an object that one can clearly see and hold out in front of them and evaluate. And that means that decisions that impact the collective can be made much more skillfully. So when a leader or a decision maker finally sees this collective system as an object, they stop trying to solve deep cultural crises with an isolated tactical band-aid. They begin to recognize that their organization isn't just a collection of individuals who are executing tasks, but they're more like a complex web of shared assumptions, unspoken rules, all with historical momentum. And so if a leader cannot see this invisible web, they're inevitably going to become entangled in it. They might introduce a new technology or restructure a department expecting some clean and simple outcome, only to be baffled when it inadvertently creates 3 new problems that they didn't see coming. And this brings us full circle to these why questions that we started at the beginning of this series. Why are corporate executives laying off tens of thousands of people with an email? Why is our ROI on AI so shockingly low? Why are token charges sometimes more expensive than the humans who used to do the work? So when we apply the lens of adult development theory, we can see that these decisions are largely being driven by minds seduced by the clean and neat simplicity of the rational and abstract mind, by the third-person perspective. They are operating with very pristine models. They're completely detached from the messy, concrete reality of the humans who have lived inside of them. They don't yet have the depth of wisdom that is needed to hold the paradox of the situation that they are navigating. So the fourth person perspective offers us a doorway into something that is closer to reality. It rather broadly asserts, it depends on the context. It demands that we replace our craving for certainty with curiosity, with a willingness to question our own assumptions and to tolerate the discomfort of ambiguity. So in this emerging age of AI, our greatest competitive advantage is not to build a better dashboard or to gain more data. It is actually our capacity to remain awake to the complexity of the moment, to be able to hold our models and our frameworks lightly, and to respond to the world not just with our intellect, but with a profound, deep human wisdom. So there is so much more that we are going to continue to unpack about the nature of each of these perspectives that are within us and what we can do to navigate them more skillfully. Psychologists have mapped this terrain. There's more beyond the fourth person perspective. They've identified a fifth person perspective and possibly even a sixth. And many people, when they hear that, they will tend to think, well, like, that sounds exciting. Like, what do I need to do to get there? I want you to recognize that that is a third person perspective impulse. That is the desire to always achieve more, to grow more, to do more, to make more money than I did last quarter. That is a healthy impulse that serves us well in some circumstances, but eventually we will all come to the logical conclusion of always doing more, of always growing more. So we're going to continue unpacking the fourth person perspective that follow. This is a rich landscape. It deserves much more of our time and attention. It is within this perspective, the fourth person perspective, that we can start to appreciate where we have come from in a way that acknowledges all of the gifts that we possess, but that can also see our limitations and our blind spots. And I mean that not only at an individual level, but at a collective one too, whether our collective is within a team or a company or our family or our country that we belong to or the entire human race. So when we first enter the fourth person perspective, it's impossible to know how to prioritize all of these collective, historical, personal things and systems that we can now see. It's incredibly exciting. It can also be incredibly disorienting. It's as if suddenly we are toddlers again who just figured out there are rules to follow and there are punishments when we break the rules, but we don't yet have the capacity to judge which punishment fits the crime. So I invite you to practice compassion towards yourself, toward other people. Not compassion in a way that is used to excuse bad behavior or as a signal of weakness. True compassion is deeply courageous. It knows how to hold the human experience with a strong spine. And goodness knows we need so much more of that now more than ever. So thank you for joining me on Vertical Intelligence. I would also like to announce that I have finally launched a website. So if you find this interesting, if you have some kind of personal or corporate experience that you are navigating, I am also a coach. I provide one-on-one consultations with people. I do team trainings. So if you want to know more, you now have a website to go to. You can reach out to me. You can book a call on my calendar. Or if you have just a question to ask, I would love to hear your thoughts or what it is that you might still be wondering about that I haven't managed to talk about yet. So thank you for listening, and I will see you next time.